And indeed, we are here. I am with Matt Mullenweg live. We started a couple minutes late because we set up the StreamYard. Sorry for that, but technology is technology. Matt, it's great to see you again. Thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, sorry, that was all my fault. I just got a new computer, and so I had to configure a few things before it worked.
The background for why we're having the call, which I think is terrific, is one of the things that when we had our discussion, I'm going to give the backstory, but when we had our discussion, I revealed I have been in this community, the WordPress community, for it's going to be on 18 and a half, 19 years. And when we were talking, you reminded me, and I understand it's been about 20 years. I think this is the 20th anniversary. And I think one of the reasons I don't want to take the words from your mouth, but one of the reasons you expressed you reached out to me is because I've been a passionate, vocal participant in our community. Critic would be a fair word. And there were things that I have said publicly as part of the various shows or media and things that I've done that you felt it was important to reach out to me and have a one-on-one discussion. And in the course of our conversation privately, we got to spend over 90 minutes together, which I thought was fantastic. And I also publicly, I want to say, I apologize to you, and I apologize to you again, because one of the things that's important to me as a human being is never to make ad hominem attacks. In other words, the person is not the thing that's important. It's their ideas and the things that they do, and everybody should be judged on their actions. And there's probably some things that I've said publicly that were borderline, if not over the line. And so I'm very sorry for those things. However, you are very gracious and honest, and to come back here today, even more so, to just allow us to have a public community discussion, to really talk like as if we were in private. And so thank you for
And like
that.
I said, happy to cover any topic. You can ask anything. Your apology is fully accepted. And I have obviously made that mistake myself before too. So we're all human.
Right. One of the things to set the tone, and I want to tell the backstory, and one of the things that makes me so passionate about this is that when I got into this almost 20 years ago, let's just make it easy, I'm a little older, and I had already been doing some things and been successful in life, but I've also, as an entrepreneur, I was at the time going through some changes with my businesses and my other things, personal life, as being a single dad. And WordPress offered me almost like a magic trick, almost like a Lego store, like a playground where your sensibilities and the philosophy that you espoused in those days, in the very early days, happened to just align with the very thing that I had come out of, which was working with building on other people's platforms. And the whole open source movement, everything about it, got me so excited. I use a metaphor quite frequently of, imagine if in 1995, Bill Gates had made Windows 95 open source, and you could have built something out of that. And that's, to me, what WordPress is and has become. But as a result of that, it's almost at 50% of the internet. I mean, we're in the high 40s. And as a result of that, those of us who've become, I don't know, professionals, people who make their living, let's say, their livelihood out of WordPress, or even just spend a lot of time with their business on a WordPress site, feel very passionately about what's the direction, where are we going? So our conversation covered a lot of those topics. I've taken the transcript of what we talked about. I made some bullet points so that at least we can maybe address a couple of the key points, but to give everybody a fair shake, because we were very candid and it was unexpected, I am going to be very careful to leave names out. We won't use names unless we both feel it's, public knowledge or something, because again, the same idea, anybody who's listening, who is interested, can figure it out. But when we talk about topics, it's more important about the topic or the philosophy or the actual business idea than it is about the individuals. Okay. So having said that, and to keep it real, the big premise of this was that I would characterize it by saying there are growing pains, tension in the WordPress community that naturally arise when something succeeds. And because I'm so passionate, I said to you, the reason for apologizing to you was because I feel it's worth my time to bitch and moan and whine about WordPress and you and the leadership and where it's going, because I spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week thinking about what a fun playground this is. So,
well, and we listen. Like people who work in core read blog posts all the time. We're in Slack. We read, the different WordPress blogs. And yeah, I try to listen to WordPress podcasts. I spend a lot of my day just consuming WordPress community stuff.
I mean, one of the things that separates you, and I know we've had, obviously this weekend, we had a lot of drama in the AI space with OpenAI and Sam Altman, and you can see that one of the things as a background, as an attorney background, I understand that things in politics, things in law, things in the background of companies are very messy. But at the end of the day, they're really just people who put their pants on one leg at a time. So I really appreciate the fact that you're paying attention and that you're interested in at least having the conversation. So let's start with
Yeah.
that.
All the
Let's
OpenAI stuff is part of the reason I got a little less sleep last night than I planned to. And I'm in
right.
San Francisco. I know a lot of these people. And so it was really just kinda wild. I've never seen anything like that before. And,
I mean, it's a power play,
at least
right?
in my professional career. Actually, yeah, I've never seen anything like that.
Um, I used to watch the show Silicon Valley, and whenever things happen out in that area, it's shocking because there's a lot of powerful people and a lot of money involved. But in this case, that was, I guess, a reinforcement of the same idea. WordPress is more, I liken it to, I used to, and maybe that's the derogatory thing, but like we were basically hanging out, all painting the fence together at one point, and then the community grew large, and you were the person that we looked to in the early days who had espoused the philosophy of how to act and how to behave and what it meant for open source and why we should contribute our time and efforts towards building this thing. And I think that's the nature of where the tension arises from, or that's the origin of it. Would you like to kind of go back and give us all your thoughts on where you think we are now versus the early days when I said to you on our call, Matt, I loved it when I heard you going in there and swinging the baseball bat about what people do or how they do it, because that was the thing that motivated me to feel it was worth backing this guy up, backing up what he's talking about. I want to be on that team.
Oh, sure. So things that have changed. Well, one is that, we've climbed a lot of the lower mountains. So now some of the challenges ahead of us are just harder problems. Like, how to solve this idea of like a full site editor and editor that's both intuitive, does everything people wants to do, but also is really fast and standards based and forward compatible. And I saw a tweet this morning where someone was like, "Hey, you know, they built this kind of site, it was over engineered, and now they're having trouble updating it." And I see that all the time. So a lot of people, especially a lot in the WordPress community, are not building their first site. They're redoing their site their second, third, fourth time since they started using WordPress. And so what makes it so, again, that's forward compatible. Um, for myself, oh, also we've shifted most of new code is JavaScript, not PHP. So that's kind of like a big change for a lot of folks. What year was it?
But
2014? I was like, "You learn JavaScript deeply."
well, I liken it to
That's us, learn
three
JavaScript
generations
deeply
of
and then
WordPress,
what's
right?
that?
I liken it to the three generations of WordPress. The early
Mm,
days, we chopped down trees and carved canoes out of it or furniture. Second generation was the first page builders. Third generation is Gutenberg, Block, and beyond, and
mhm.
React and all that. And it definitely is part of the conversation about what the core does now or how the core is being done. But also, I hope we'll talk about it today as well, like what effect that has on .org versus .com, the marketplace of those of us who make stuff versus what's WordPress or its partners or Automatic doing, and the hosting companies. And we'll get into some of that. Do you feel that it's been difficult for you as the figurehead to make the evolution from just sitting around a campfire where everybody was, hey, it's Matt, to it's Matt Mullenweg, let's call it, right, co-founder, founder of
Mhm.
WordPress? Does that come with responsibilities or things that cause you to have to say or do things differently in public than you actually feel? Because again, I admired in the early days how you just came out and you said and did exactly the way I think you really felt. Oh, your mic went mute there. Your mic went mute. Ladies and gentlemen, we're having a technical difficulty.
Hello, hello?
Yeah, you're back. Okay.
That's so weird. Um, it's not that I'm saying anything different from what I feel. I'm probably choosing to get involved in different things. Um, so sometimes what happens if I just drop in on like a track ticket, um, well, so two things. One, sometimes I'm just trying to brainstorm and people take it like a little too seriously. Two, I need to have time to be there for the whole conversation and discussion, which I don't always. And then three, sometimes people want to argue with me just to like override the co-founder of WordPress. So I sometimes feel like some of the discussion gets a little more adversarial than it needs to be because we're all just trying to like make good software for the WordPress community. So I feel like my biggest points of leverage right now are, being a figurehead, like you said. I think that's a positive thing as well as a negative thing. So to the extent I can use my position and my co-founder privilege to, give a state of the word talk, to take Q&A, to listen, meet as many WordPress users as possible and try to synthesize, particularly the folks who aren't participating in WordPress every day. We hear the opinions of the folks who are in the track and in the GitHub and in the meetings, but there is millions of people already using WordPress who can't participate in those forums, and then billions of people who haven't started using WordPress yet. And so,
Right.
how can I represent those views? It kind of our representative thing, and everyone brings this. Like there's agencies that bring the agency view, or people who use all the site builders that I've never used before, or other things like that. And then finally, highest leverage is through people. And I personally have recruited many folks who work on WordPress. I meet them at work camps. I run a company of 2,000 people now, of which 1,500 of them are building on WordPress. 100 of them contribute full time. Probably another 80 or 100 contribute part time, and that's still only about 10 or 15% of the contributors to WordPress. So on like a major core release. And so
Well,
getting the right people involved, and also I really try to bring in like talent and folks who aren't represented in our current contributors, is I feel like my biggest point of leverage. In fact, I would say this to anyone leading a company or any product, like the people are first and people are the most important.
okay. So let's do, I think that actually leads into the place where your motive, perhaps your stated motive for reaching out to me which was, let's just say we have, as the figurehead of WordPress, social
Mhm.
media, your professional and public statements and engagements, and then you have your interaction at the business level, either in front of or behind the scenes. We do have this unusual dichotomy. I don't think anybody listening to this doesn't understand it, but one of the things that's so unusual about WordPress is I use the two columns, the .com, the .org. That's something that maybe if we had a magic 8 ball, we could go back, or a time machine, we could go back and change. But there's a confusion when people don't understand the .org versus the .com. But in terms of yourself and I think the tension of people saying things about you that maybe were unfair, untrue, friction causing, caused you to feel the need to reach out spontaneously at various times on social media, which was not necessarily your normal course of action. I'm interested to know, because I think as a human being, it's fair for you to be able to say, like what was your feeling about the things that happened recently, and we're not going to say specifically, that caused you to reach out and interact with specific individuals unexpectedly when that wasn't your normal thing? And again, I
Well,
use that as a metaphor just because some founders are constantly going on X, Elon Musk is all day long, blah, blah, blah. That's not what we know from you.
and I'm on Twitter a good amount. Maybe WordPress would be 80% if I wasn't. I have to wonder that sometimes. I mean, I reached out to you because you accused me and Automatic of tax fraud. I was like, hey, criticize me for things that are true. You can look up the statements of the WordPress Foundation and everything and see exactly who donates. You can see exactly how much I donate. I donate a bit. I actually try to not donate too much because I can't be too large a percentage of the total donations. So as as other organizations donate, we set up the sort of patron program there. I can increase my donations, but I have to keep it below a certain percentage. And Automatic is, I don't know how to put this. We don't have to pay taxes until we make a lot more money than we have in the past. Meaning that the reason we've raised hundreds of millions of dollars at outside capital is we've spent more than we've made. So just carrying forward the previous losses, tax optimization is not something the company is worried about. For it's not something we try to optimize for. And again, you can look at all the foundations and everything and see exactly where the money goes. So I just wanted to correct. You can criticize me for what I say on Twitter, the decisions of core, all the things that are verifiably true. But if something's verifiably, not true, I just wanted to correct it and have it out there.
Right. And I think that's fair. As a rebuttal,
Have you fact checked it since the conversation? Like,
yeah, but I also know what I said and did. So in fairness, I was a participant in that particular thread. I was not the one, because I have no interest in your text in it. I think your mic is coming through. I have no interest in the tax standing of Automatic. My interest in what I commented on was somebody else's thread with regard to the gray area of what Automatic's employees and yourself do with regard to .org or with regard to the finances inside of the marketplace of .org and so forth. I was a participant in that thread. The people who were involved in making those other comments, and I think there was maybe 2 other social media, specifically on Twitter, kind of discussions where you came out of the blue. One was involving one individual who works in the community, and the other was an independent vendor who is very well known and been around for some time. And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when we discuss stuff, I think both you and I had an honest conversation. There are things that somebody can do and say that you don't feel like you're at your best and you wish you could take it back. Would you like to comment on that? Because your mic, I think, might still be open. Just check. Oh, you're good. You're fine. No, your mic is off now. Now you disconnected it, I think, because it's not muted. It's just gone.
Okay. How's that?
Yeah, you're good now. You're good now.
Okay, thanks for helping me debug. This is my...
Sorry, I surprised you with StreamYard out of the blue, but I knew it would be a better recording experience.
That's all right. Yeah, so there's some things I would stand by. Now, I did apologize to both of the people on Twitter. I deleted one of the tweets, the one about Dan, and I just, I regretted it. I've only deleted like 3 tweets in my 17-year history on Twitter. That's one of them. And for the other folks, I don't want to comment also because there's pending complaints with the WordPress.org stuff and everything. So I just don't want to speak to any of that. But I did apologize, and happy to do more in the future or have more conversations.
I mean, I think it's fair to say for anybody, it's a very difficult position to be in when you have millions of opinions, millions of eyes upon you, and there's never going to be anything you can say or do. But at the same time, it must be terribly frustrating for you to have all that light shined upon you from all those angles. I say it now, I said it in private. I would not want to be in your seat, even with other things that might come as a benefit, because that's a lot of pressure. That's for a human being, a lot of things to carry, every word being scrutinized. So in terms of the things that are in the middle column, not social media, but rather the position of WordPress.org, WordPress.com column versus WordPress.org, and your public position as our figurehead. Now, we all know there's many of the, you've stated there's in the thousands of people who work for the company. But in terms of the community, I think it's fair to say that all of us, especially those making our livelihood, still look to you for direction. And one of the topics we talked about was there seems to be a gray area arising between the norms, and I use the term laws, but let's say the norms and the stated behavior of yourself about how people should operate in a profit-oriented company working within the open source community. And I think I will state the question like this. What are your thoughts? What is it on your side of the table, like when you realize you have an obligation to the .com and the investors and the other capital that's involved versus the needs and the wants and the desires of those of us on the .org side who make our living, to have you be really clear which way this whole ship is going. And I'm going to use the metaphor, not make it feel like you're reaching over into our side of the column for the benefit of the other column.
Sure. And that's honestly been a fear and a criticism of Automatic since Automatic started, which is now 18 years ago. I will just offer as food for thought that multi-site performance improvements, Gutenberg, Akismet being free by default, all of these things, we could have made a lot of more money and honestly moved faster, and it would have been easier if we kept those proprietary to Automatic. Even like when we started, we could have forked WordPress and run it as a SaaS multi-site. We had a thing at the early days of WordPress.com where someone else had taken multi-site and they were actually growing faster than WordPress.com was. And so that was very interesting, very humbling. And now what I truly believe is that while in the short term, you can sort of certainly theoretically imagine, or there might be actually real conflicts between a for-profit and a nonprofit, or I would say, by the way, that's not just Automatic. There's many conflicts between all the companies commercializing WordPress and what might be good for the core. And most of the companies commercializing WordPress do not donate back their crown jewels. Maybe if one of the page builders had contributed to core, their page builder, that would be Gutenberg now. That would be the basis of what we're doing. So that usually doesn't happen. However, I believe in the long term, if, when we try to operate in a long-term way and when everyone else operates in a long-term way, it actually creates a lot more opportunities. And really all I can point to is that, go back in the history of WordPress and look on the mailing list, look on the blogs, but everyone's saying I was evil. Everyone's saying Automatic was going to kill community and everything. And then just look at how many businesses have been created since then. How many billions of dollars they make, far more than Automatic's revenue. Companies that start from scratch, like WP Engine, and become their own, I forget the employees, but more than 1,000 people, estimated to be hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. Like those started since like 10 years after Automatic. So, or maybe it's a little early, but it's like, many, many years after all these criticisms. So all I can point to as well is like, if you really believe that today, set a calendar for 1 year, 3 years in the future, and just look out there. Like, hopefully Automatic's grown, but also have other plugins grown? Has WordPress grown? Has, what's happening out there? That's all I can really point to.
Well, how do you, okay. So I don't think anybody would argue, because that was the thing that I discussed intermixed with my criticisms of things that I'm not feeling are clear about your leadership role. I can't deny, none of us would deny. That's why we're so in love with and so passionate about WordPress, that the economic benefit to those of us in the ecosystem is enormous. And Jason Cohn and everybody else who's followed with WP Engine is a good example. We'll talk about hosting hopefully in a second. But in terms of, I'm interested in knowing how you perceive your role today, if it is something that you have, let's say, clarity on, of what would be the situation if WordPress.com just clearly broke away, said this is .com, and then all the rest of us had .org. Because I think the problem, the friction for many of us, the reasons for my criticism come when that is not clear, when there's a gray area. What is the term? I think do as thee, not as me. In other words, in the early days, as I mentioned, you were very clear with certain companies that didn't follow what you espoused as the philosophy of WordPress and specifically open source. And now there's economic reasons behind people's motives and passion. And if .com is a separate business and it created and supports the core, nobody would deny that. It's when it reaches into areas like hosting or listings inside of the repository, or the way that certain pages on .org are managed or controlled. It has to do with who hires or not hires, or who volunteers for managing the decision-making process of who gets, a tap on the shoulder and not. So the gray area I'm asking about, where do you personally feel at this stage your role is, in terms of, is it for someone else to decide? Is it for us to decide for ourselves in .org? Do you feel that it would be better if .com clearly did just, we'll fork it and run away with it, and the rest of us will take what's here and do our thing? I mean, do you have thoughts on that?
You ask such long questions. Sometimes it's hard
I
to hit
know,
one
sorry.
point.
Simplifying it, where do you feel your
No,
role
it's
is
okay. I can
between
answer it.
.com and .org? Because that's where this gray area and friction arises from, you personally, as a leader.
Sure. So actually, I would say the sort of original mistake was having the .com experience be too different from WP admin or WordPress.org. And to that, I will actually describe that what we're trying to do is make those interfaces one and the same, essentially. Because right now, if someone makes a tutorial or book or YouTube video or something for, kind of vanilla WP admin, they go to WordPress.com and they get an interface which in some ways is the same and in some ways is different. And it can be confusing. So there can be almost like an uncanny valley. And so if you look at a lot of the things we've done to .com over the most recent years, it used to not support plugins and themes. It now does. The interfaces are the plugins and themes now you can go into the Calypso interface. We've added SFTP support and SSH access and logging and all these sort of like more traditional hosting features. So if I had to say also my mistake I made with WordPress.com is we thought that if we could make sort of a more streamlined version of WordPress, it would bring people into the community more. And it certainly has brought a lot, but I feel like in some ways the early versions of WordPress.com were kind of Fisher Price WordPress. And of course, why people choose WordPress is because of the flexibility. It's because of the 55,000 plugins and themes. And so we really have to fully support those. Now, as that succeeds, it definitely expands the market for plugins and themes. They have more potential customers, which I think is awesome. It does also expand some hosting opportunities. And people are like, well, you're competing with host. By the way, we've always competed with the host for hosting. However, we are doing so at like relatively higher price points. So we might bring someone in that if they become cost conscious, can share things out. Now, finally, what I will say is that we've also tried to do it in a way that everything we do is available to other hosts. So what do I mean by that? Think of the core features on WordPress.com that are super, super popular that like literally no other host does. So like stats, the built-in stats system, real-time stats, you can support billions of page views, real-time, by the way. It doesn't throw things away like Google Analytics does. Brute force protection, security scanning, that's all built in the Jetpack. By the way, that's free. And that leverages not just all the WordPresses and everything in the world, that leverages all the data we get from Tumblr and every place else. The sort of worldwide, 30 data center network we built at Automatic. Photon is a free CDN that in real time can resize images, does resize images to exactly match the DPI and the dimensions of the photos. It converts it in real time to WebP if the browser supports it. It supports HTTP2 and now HTTP3. So this is like, again, free. It's built into, we need to charge for some of this stuff, but like this is all built in the Jetpack. And there's over 5 million connected Jetpacks. And they all get access to all this stuff on every single web host. Again, we designed it. You can look at the launch of Jetpack. The launch partners were GoDaddy, WP.
Yeah,
it was like every major host. And let me say one more thing,
please,
because your question was so long. At least like my answer be half as long. Finally, we are making the entire platform behind WordPress.com available. So we have this new thing called WP Cloud, and it basically at like super wholesale pricing, often cheaper than what the hosts are currently spending on their infrastructure, gives everything I just described to be white labeled for everyone else. It's like the AWS for WordPress. Any host, anybody out there, any agency can take this, white label it, have their own version, and sell it to anyone. And they'll get all the security, all the scanning, all the auto upgraded. WordPress.com sites like don't get hacked the way other sites do because of the way we do security scanning and protection at the edge and everything. So that's all available with WP Cloud now.
I mean, your answer actually is interesting. First of all, thank you. And I don't think that myself or anybody else would deny that the innovation that comes from the investment and the time spent on .com trickles into the rest of the ecosystem. But I actually, from what you just said, feel like your answer revealed where the tension is. Here's why.
Mhm.
You said the dirty word jetpack. Okay.
That's a
Jetpack.
beautiful word. It's my favorite of our brands.
And jetpack strikes fear into the hearts of mere mortals on the .org side as something that is the #1 violator of do as thee, not as me. Because for anybody else to create a plugin that had phone home capabilities and all those upsells and else, that's one of the topics we talked about and hopefully we'll address today, is that the other innovations. But is a simpler way to ask you a question, because I appreciate I go long, is that the things you described on .com are exemplary, and they demonstrate how if WordPress as an entire organization was set up as one thing, which it's nearly impossible to imagine unwinding into, then the rest of the ecosystem that's been evolving here for 20 years might be as excited about what .com is doing as you are. But for those of us on .org, the fact that you're excited about what .com is doing and offering, and those are the very things that are competing against the participants who make their livelihood in .org, that's the friction. In our conversation, I used the metaphor of WordPress.com could own the bridge, and those of us who have trucks would be happy to pay homage to drive over your bridge and use the stuff that you've built for infrastructure. But as it is, you've gotten into the trucking business and you're directly competing hosting companies, software companies, agencies, and that's where a lot of the friction, only because it's not really clear, like, where is this going exactly? Because if any of us attempted to do that, with a few exceptions, it would not be well received.
Okay. I think
is
you
that,
said something
is that a clear question? Sorry, I tried to simplify that, but it needed a couple.
Yes. One, I think, by the way, the plugin, people who police the plugin directory, like, Mika for so long. By the way, if Jetpack did something against the guidelines, Jetpack would also be in trouble with the plugin directory people. It's not like Jetpack is managing that, or even I'm involved in that in the day-to-day at all. There's a question from Andrew Palmer in the channel. He says, how do I feel about the overreach of certain plugin offers? And I'll include Jetpack and Woo in this question. Something that, and I actually posted publicly about this in I forget if I put it in Meta or Core Slack. I do wish that when I created the sort of admin notices hook, because we had these issues, I think maybe originally with Akismet, where after you activated it, you had to put in the key for it to start working. And probably what I should have done at the time was done a redirect to the Akismet page. And instead we put in this, admin banner. Now fast forward 20 years and the admin banners are out of control. And so I talked about a guideline where maybe, we just allow people to put banners in their on their plugin page and not on other pages. And by the way, if we made that a guideline, it would apply just as much to Jetpack as anyone else. But when I challenge that Jetpack or any other plugins that we are currently aware of, or the plugin guidelines are violating the actual guidelines, I do agree that particularly admin notices taken to where they are right now feels untenable. You log into some of these dashboards.
Graffiti on the bridge, right?
It's not yours or mine, but we've all probably logged into a friend's or a client's dashboard, and oh my goodness, there's just like 20 stacked in there. So by the way, they're not working. People are just ignoring them. They get this banner blindness, and so that's broken. But also, finally, I would like to challenge. Like I just said, there's over 5 million So is the argument that, and I'll put out a subscriber number for Jetpack of like 150,000 subscribers. So are you saying that the other 4,850,000 people plus using all these free features of Jetpack, including the stats, the the notifications, the secure log, like all this stuff, are you saying that us providing that for free is slowing down WordPress?
No, I think
We
it's
have a much bigger business if Jetpack was paid only, to be honest. We're subsidizing all these free features because we're trying to grow WordPress, which, by the way, creates lots of opportunities for other things. And by the way, paid CDNs like Cloudflare are doing just fine, even though we offer a free one. So it doesn't mean that I think it creates opportunity. It also just grows WordPress a ton. What I do worry about is, to be honest, like lots of other companies are coming to WordPress. They make money or compete with Automatic, sometimes undercutting or like, and they don't contribute back in the same way. And so one of my challenges in the company is like, uh, trying to keep the business alive and competitive while also maintaining, tons of contributions back to core. And you can get a tragedy of the commons problem where if other people aren't contributing back, Five for the future, basically, it really removes the incentives for other companies too. And it becomes more of a like, well, I'm just going to get mine. I'm going to try to maximize the profit because they're doing it. And so, that's where we end up. There's other folks that are seen as aggressive on advertising the dashboard or whatever. To be honest, if they were doing a full Five for the future, I would worry far less, because at least as they made more money, that would, some percentage of it would come back into core. And, WordPress overall market share has slowed in the past year. I think some of that's because we grew a lot in, kind of the 20 and 21. So it might just be a reversion to the mean. I think some of it is, the methodology of how that's tracked changed. Alexa stopped publishing their sites. And so I think some of the methodology changed. And then I think, honestly, some of it is also that e-commerce is now like a big reason why people are building sites and how they're choosing the CMS. Shopify has 6,000, 7,000 full-time employees, of which a majority are in R&D. WooCommerce has 450. And so like the most competitive thing out there is much smaller. And there's also lots of point solutions that people are like, instead of contributing to Woo, they're like picking off one little slice of it and creating a competitive product. Again, that's fine if they're also contributing back, but that's not really happening right now.
I just want to make a public comment here because, first of all, thank you. That was extraordinarily detailed and gave a lot of meat on the bone. I want to make a public comment that in our private conversation, you specifically begged me to shut up and let you finish your conversation. So I'm using every ounce of my willpower not to keep interrupting you every time you say something I don't agree with or don't understand. But I do appreciate that it's going to work better for us. And thank you for that answer. I do want to pull back to the beginning of what we talked about in that last answer. I think that the frustration of the ecosystem is that we can't undo history and make .org and .com into one thing anymore. And as a result of that, the ecosystem of .org has grown up independently, and using that third column I started with at the beginning of the call, with hosting companies, developers, people who are agencies, people essentially who are driving trucks across the bridge built with the stuff from .com and the core. The frustration and the friction, number one, comes from we all still view you as our symbolic, if not actual, figurehead or leader. And we're looking to you to be very clear about what's the behavior, what are the norms and laws for operating in this bifurcated system. Number two was the competition in the products. Nobody would deny, even me. I mean, you listed some incredible innovations on the hosting and on the development of the code side, and even things that are handed out for free. But you also made it very clear those are for profit motive of .com. that's not open to the rest of us to participate when .com sells something or makes something. We have to compete against that. And number three, there are a lot of questions in here, and you and I talked about it privately. We won't name names, but everybody knows who we're referring to. There are some particular, I'm going to use the term, honestly, bad actors who not only have a can of spray painting the bridge, but are doing what is viewed as power play spray painting graffiti on the bridge, that all the rest of us are then left with the decision. If we make our livelihood in WordPress, do we decide to go with the norm that the community needs a clean bridge, or do we go, well, we have to be just as bad as that company or companies? So those are the things that, I mean, if you'd like to follow up with, those are where the friction is. It's nobody denies that you guys are doing amazing stuff at the core and that we're half the internet at WordPress. But the .org side of things is at a crossroads of who are we competing against? And by the way, including large companies, because you were surprised when you said $100 million in the budget of a hosting company here and there. And that's why it's hard for you to compete. And I said, I think it's hard for you to compete because they offer a value proposition that people understand, or a relationship or something.
Okay. At first, I want to really challenge this dichotomy you keep offering that like .org and .com is mutually exclusive. I think if you actually look, or even ask our competitors, they would say that they have sort of a flywheel. They're very complementary to each other. And it's been one of the hardest things for others to compete with because they don't have that equivalent. So while I totally get the confusion, and I am doing everything I can to address that with both future versions of both, including like Gutenberg taking over a lot more of the interface, which is then identical and like being totally portable. Also Gutenberg being on other platforms. It's going to be on Drupal maybe soon. Like, so that sort of stuff I think is really open source centric and available. Someone also asked, like, is phoning home violating the GPL? I just want to fact correct. No, it's not. And in fact, one thing about the GPL is, I mean, you could have malware that doesn't violate the GPL, like literally. The license is incredibly permissive. So then you get into
I think we agree on that, by the way. I'm not arguing that legally it tells you can't make malware, but it's the norm that you brought forth 19, 20 years ago that I think we all rely on.
So next what happens is, well, we have guidelines on WordPress.org. By the way, there's lots of plugins and themes that are super popular that aren't on WordPress.org. So, people get it from ThemeForest, they get it from Envato. Like, there's all the pro versions of things, by the way. So, like, yes, I could kick people out of WordPress.org. It doesn't actually change their ability to be in tens of millions of WordPresses.
But do you think you have to kick them out, or just say that it's wrong or right like you used to? I mean, I'm not suggesting you personally have to be auditing everything, right?
And then finally, I will challenge the fact that I no longer say that something is right or wrong. And I do still reach out to people. And, the example where something, again, not against the GPL, not against our current guidelines, although maybe we should make a guideline about this, is there's a plugin, I think it was like Osmotive, modified plugin results things invisibly without saying so. They've reversed that. I reached out privately. There's some discussion publicly. That's been reverted. By the way, I also get it that I've had to ask my own team sometimes, like an overzealous marketer, someone gets like too in there, they just go a little step too far. And I would say that at least to myself, I think a lot about the user experience of WordPress and don't want these things when taking to the logical conclusion. Everything we do, I'm like, okay, we're setting an example. We're leading by example. And so we need to be careful. If the thing we do, then every single other plugin does, like we got to think about that. And like I said, the mistake of making the admin notice hook in the banner is kind of a thing. Like, yeah, I would do that differently now. And we did it. And then everyone else did it in the world. And now we have this NASCAR, or it looks like Times Square. And like, the proposals around that, around like notification center or something, I actually don't like, because I think it just sweeps it under the rug. So I think what we really need to go to is finding some other UX patterns that get the very real problem being solved, which is sometimes plugins require like further steps to activate. Sometimes you need to renew your credit card. Like there's all sorts of very valid things where you need to reach out to the user and get them to do it in action. And we just need some different UX patterns there.
Okay,
And
so
probably
I'm
some
gonna use
trial
that.
and error.
I'm gonna use that as a lever into one of the things that we went into towards the end of our private conversation, which was you're very well studied, and I appreciate it because again, I'm older than a lot of the people in the community, but you're very well studied and well published about your research into how other companies, and you said you had a background in poli-sci and so forth, and so how governing systems, Machiavellian, better to be loved than feared. I have been proposing to you in our
Is
two
it
calls,
feared than loved, he said?
feared than loved, whatever.
I
But
think it's fair to
the
be
idea
loved
is
and feared. So that would be my
the
own,
ham,
that's the Machiavellian
you
philosophy.
said
but
carrot and stick, right? Which is fine. But the point is, I don't think anybody has ever viewed you as a personality that is like, hard. You're just a normal, regular, likable person, and you've gotten this ball in motion. And so those times that I referred to in the past when you were more, it was a smaller circle of us, it was interesting to me to see that you could see the challenges of policing this thing. I think the nature of what we've just been talking about is that without going on half the internet using the stuff, the clarity of who's in charge of making decisions about what's good, the norm, the rules, the guidelines is really in need of that review, which you just literally said, because maybe the things that were good in the early days of a more intimate community can't work in a society where there are some powerful bad actors now who are in a monopolistic way using black hat tactics. People have used the term shady behavior that all of the rest of us recognize and don't wish to follow. And unless those companies have things taken away from them by somebody with the authority to do so, and let's use things that are in your control, because I agree, you can't control Envato or ThemeForest, but what we can control is if one of those bad actors loses their position in the repository for their free plugins, or is otherwise not given favorable position on the .org pages, or if the people who are either voluntarily or being paid to moderate are given guidelines that apply to the individual as well as to the large company. I think that is where our solutions lie, and a lot of this friction goes away, because for you personally, I put it out to you and I say it here publicly. I don't think I or anybody else expects you to be going around and doing this, like spending your days pointing fingers or getting involved. But you also can't be in the gray area either. You can no longer be in the, well, we've got the teams that we used to do it with and these individual volunteers that used to do it with, and I don't have a good explanation necessarily why this is this and this is that, but look at all the other good things. Those answers are honest, but they're not going to solve our problems. I had proposed, when we look at this, what's the community? Something along the lines of a consortium, something along the lines of, I don't want to use the term cartel, but those of us in the economic side of .org with benevolent rules that prevent a monopoly from any of us. In other words, what do you think of the idea of, as you just said, changing the rules so we can police ourselves on the .org, and that alleviates your pressure of having to be in this unenviable position of where is Matt Mullenweg's position on this?
I think we can create, I think some of these already exist, and even more have been created this year. So, you and I both apologized for a mistake at the beginning of this. I think sometimes we focus too much on the mistakes happening, and maybe even trying to prevent every mistake from happening, than looking over the long term, like how do people correct them? So, like I said, I actually assume that every single company, every single person involved with WordPress is going to screw up or is going to make a mistake. It's more about what we do afterwards. And also part of what I want to do afterwards is let's learn from it, let's forgive each other, and let's move on. Even with, all the people we've mentioned today, like there's nothing to be gained from us becoming more separate, more acrimonious, breaking down the walls of communication or anything. There's everything to be gained by us taking everything that happens, talking about it, learning from it, And I also agree that collaborative thing could be amazing. Now, where are people collaborating today? Guess what? All the hosts compete with each other. They also all coordinate on security. When Automatic discovers a security vulnerability, we report it. By the way, that's typically what happens to plugins. Depending on the vulnerability, there's also a private channel that all the major hosts are in where they can put it in the network layer. So why do WordPress sites get hacked so much less than they used to? Well, even often before a core release or before a plugin is updated, we've deployed, not just us, but like I would say probably 80% of WordPress websites or more are protected at the network layer. So regardless, even if you're on an old version, like there's a sort of a firewall at the edge, which is protecting the vast majority of WordPresses. We've all worked together on auto updates. We've got that really in a good place for core and getting it for plugins and themes too, which also requires participation from plugin and theme authors. We created the Enterprise Council and the Consumer Council, which was basically two committees, the councils I made. You can look up the people that were in them. They had meetings. That actually totally failed. But
I mean, I use the term student body council as an example. Everybody's well-intentioned, but the difference was, sorry, I'm not particularly pointing at any person, but like appointed committees or people who are on, let's say, the non-commercial side of things in the open marketplace don't have the same experience or viewpoint of those of us who make our livelihood in .org. I think that's what I brought to
I would 100% challenge that, because look at the people who are on those councils. They make their living from WordPress.org. I mean, literally, look at them. Like Enterprise Council, CEO of 10up, CEO of HumanMate, CEO. Like it was all. I think part of the mistake was actually we had too many CEOs and leaders. And we needed some more.
Perhaps a C-suite officer is not the same as a small plugin company is not the same as an individual developer or somebody who's an agency that's two people. I mean, it's a different viewpoint, isn't it? Right.
We also had those too. I can go back and look at who was in there. There were small agency people. Right. There was individual developers. There was large plugin companies, all represented. Now, those were great because I think it got all those people talking. However, that iteration did not work. Okay, so fast forward is happening again. All those companies that compete with each other are now having meetings again, now creating white papers that go on WordPress.org. There's a whole enterprise subsite on WordPress.org now that is sort of in a neutral way trying to solve a lot of the problems that large enterprises have when adopting WordPress, or the fears they have, in a way that isn't specific to any one of those companies. We just redid the showcase, which now highlights, again, whenever you meet someone who's like, I don't think WordPress is good, or is it, whatever, I want them to be able to point to the showcase and say, look at this. You can do any of these things. And then the last thing, it just happened. I announced it at WordCamp US. We brought all the learning plugins together. Sensei, LearnDash, all the learning plugins together. And I convened a meeting, said, hey, let's work on common data structures, import, export.
Right. But like, let's
I tried to do this block editors. I couldn't get anyone on it. I would love to do it with SEO plugins in the future. I'm having trouble getting those people talking to each other in the same way. But this is literally happening in segments of the community. And I think if we focus on the user first, like data, sort of user liberty and freedom. So data fidelity, import, export, standards for things, like we create a really open thing. And finally, if you don't like it too much, there's always the option to fork. Like, that's how WordPress started, was a fork. There's been
that's why we're here in this conversation.
Yeah, there's Classic Press who really hated, like, whatever it was, WordPress 5.0 and above. So that's always an option. That's the beauty of open source, is that you fundamentally in the day have the freedom to make your own choices and choose your own path.
Okay. I mean, that's actually, and by the way, I think it's worth, I don't think anybody I'm seeing we have a very nice audience here today asking great questions, but I don't think anybody here is delusional about why we're talking. Nobody's here to, say that we hate this. I think, as I said to you previously, and I'll say it again here, the reason I'm spending the time today and you're being so generous is because we all love WordPress. And I think we're all incredibly grateful that 20 years later, we're in this opportunity that we have, right, to make a living and so forth.
And I'm going to, thank you. And also just I have a very hard stop at the top of the hour, so I have to run. You just mentioned time. But thank you so much for reaching out. Thank you so much for facilitating this discussion. Thank you to all the people who joined and put the great questions in there. And keep the conversation going. I am on Slack. Anyone can DM me anytime. I'm on Twitter, unfortunately, a little too much. At mention me there, at Photomat. Comment on my blog. There's all these ways you can reach out. I'm happy to continue the conversations with everyone who wants to talk about it. So thank you so much.
How much time do you have left? Give me, is it a minute or what do we have? Because I have a couple questions.
It is 59:30 seconds, so I have to go right now. I so apologize, but we can do this again sometime.
I'll tell you what. Let's do this because I'm happy everybody's on YouTube.
I gotta go.
Let's call it a day.
An hour. Please don't try
to be continued. Because I want to thank you very much. I think many people had commented, and thanks for everybody who's participating. These are names and faces that I have become friends with or colleagues with. I think everybody agrees this kind of dialogue is very productive for what we're all trying to achieve. And he's gone. I'm still here. I'm not going to carry on without Matt, but I wanted to thank everybody. We had at some point close to 100 live participants. Thank you everybody for participating. I would like to suggest we continue the conversation over on either Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Just email me at help@wplaunchify.com. I think the fact that Matt made himself available, and I only got to a fraction of the things we talked about privately, but I think the essence of the takeaway of this for me is we all have a goal in mind that doesn't have a desire to punish certain people for being naughty or to say that, spank this person for being naughty. Rather, it's that we all want to compete in a space where we can all make the things that we love to make and make a livelihood if that's our goal, or we use WordPress for the purposes of our own businesses. And I think I see the vision of WordPress as a service to being distinctly different in the .org space than it is in the .com space. And so I would like to ask everybody here to perhaps participate directly with me, and we can bring these things as a whole, a consortium of some sort, to the higher ups, if you will, the .com, starting with Matt, to say, we would like to self-police, we would like to self-manage, we would like to create an organization where, as I said in my private conversation, all of the truckers who use the bridge and the benefits of WordPress.com's core and so forth can pay homage, we can pay a tax, we can pay whatever, but that we're allowed to self-police, self-create our own rules and bylaws and norms so that certain actors in our community are not any longer given the ability to force the rest of us into these tough choices, which is, wait a second, I pay for my kids' food and their education and so forth by working in the WordPress space, and that company is being very naughty and they're doing things that I wouldn't want to do, and it's bad for my customers, it's bad for the community, it's bad for everybody if we all start acting badly. The metaphor I used with Matt was stop signs out in a rural neighborhood or out in the country are not necessarily going to kill somebody if you don't stop at it. But if people get used to not stopping at stop signs, eventually something bad happens. And I think that's where we're at today with us approaching 50% of the marketplace for CMSs. Those of us who've made 20-year or even shorter investments in WordPress need to have some sense of control that we're not acting naughty in competition with other people. And that's it. So I want to say thanks to everybody. I think this was terrific, more than I had dreamed of. And I was pleasantly surprised it was the real Matt who reached out, which I think shows a great amount of character for the person who is the leader of our community, the figurehead. But right now, he's expressed, in my opinion, the view that we can make some new rules, change the rules. So reach out to me, help@wplaunchify.com. You can find me at Spencer Forman on all social, SpencerForman, just like it's spelled. And that's it. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next video.